The actor who played the skipper was shot down over the Pacific, broke both ankles in the crash, and came home with a Purple Heart. The woman who signed the pilot contract did it specifically because she expected the show to fail and wanted a free trip to Hawaii. And the actress America voted its favorite castaway for 50 years, died during a pandemic. Her final medical bills covered by strangers on the internet. This is what really happened to the cast of Gilligan's Island. Before the white sailor hat, there was already a character that had defined him. From 1959 to 1963, Bob Denver played Maynard G. Krebs on The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis, television's first beatnik, a performance that required real comedic intelligence to sustain across 4 seasons while appearing entirely effortless. He was already a known quantity when Gilligan's Island was being cast. Jerry Van Dyke was offered the role of Gilligan first. He turned it down to star in My Mother the Car, a decision that became one of Hollywood's most frequently cited professional miscalculations. Denver stepped in, and the white hat was placed on his head for the first time in 1964. It never fully came off. The typecasting that followed was methodical and complete. Hollywood saw him in one register and left him there. He moved eventually to Princeton, West Virginia, far from the industry's center, where he and his wife Dreama hosted a local radio program. In 1998, a package containing marijuana arrived at their home. Both were charged. Dreama's case was resolved without conviction. Denver pleaded no contest. He continued appearing at fan conventions and reunion productions, wearing the hat because the audience expected it and because somewhere along the way the hat had stopped being a costume and become simply what he was. Bob Denver died on September 2, 2005, at 70 years old, from complications during treatment for throat cancer. He wore that hat for 3 seasons, then 40 more years after. Whether it was a role or a life was a question he never appeared to answer directly. While Denver's relationship with the hat was complicated, the man standing next to him every episode had reached a very different conclusion and built a business around it. His father, Alan Hale Sr., had played Little John in 3 different Robin Hood films, beginning beside Douglas Fairbanks in 1922 and most famously beside Errol Flynn in 1938. The family business was performance, and the younger Hale understood from the beginning that his particular inheritance was the large, physically commanding, reliable presence. He spent the 1940s and 1950s in westerns and adventure pictures, playing men whose job was to look unshakable. Then came the captain's hat. What made Jonas Grumby work was Hale's refusal to play the skipper as merely a fool. The character was in charge of something, and Hale played him that way even when the material was ridiculous. The comedy came from circumstances, not from total incompetence. That distinction is subtle, and it is everything. After Gilligan's Island ended in 1967, Hale did something almost no cast member managed. He made complete peace with the role and built a livelihood from that peace. He co-owned Alan Hale's Lobster Barrel in Los Angeles, greeting customers in full skipper mode, captain's hat included. He appeared in all 3 reunion TV movies. He signed photographs with the enthusiasm of someone who had decided, consciously and early, that the role was a gift rather than a trap. Alan Hale Jr. died on January 2, 1990, at 68 years old, from thymus cancer. He was the most honest man about what that island had given him, and he spent the rest of his life collecting on it. While Hale had made peace with the lagoon, one of his fellow castaways was carrying something far heavier than any role the show ever gave her. She was Miss Nevada, 1959, and she represented the state at the Miss America pageant. Before the island, she had built the kind of steady professional foundation that does not always make headlines, but does create careers, theater, guest roles, and the long, unglamorous groundwork of someone serious about the work. She was 25 when she first played Mary Ann Summers, and the character quietly became part of a debate the show never intended to create. Mary Ann versus Ginger became one of American TV's longest-running fan arguments, and Dawn Wells understood better than almost anyone that the audience's attachment to a fictional person can become very real. She went to the fan conventions. She wrote books connected to the character. She maintained the relationship with Mary Ann for decades with the consistency of someone who knew what that role had meant to people. The years after the industry stopped calling were harder. She faced serious financial difficulties, And in later life, friends helped launch crowdfunding efforts to cover medical and personal expenses. The woman who had been one of American television's most recognizable faces, needing help from strangers on the internet. Dawn Wells died on December 30th, 2020, at 82 years old, from complications of COVID-19. The woman who helped win America's heart for more than 50 years died in a way the character she played could never have prepared anyone to imagine. In the show's mythology, the man standing nearest to Marianne was the most capable person on the island. In real life, his record of service made everything the professor was written to do look almost modest. Before the island, Russell Johnson flew combat missions over the Pacific as an Army Air Corps bombardier during the Second World War. He was shot down. He broke both ankles in the crash and came home with a Purple Heart and other military honors. After the war, he used the GI Bill to study acting and spent years working through science fiction pictures like It Came from Outer Space in 1953 and Attack of the Crab Monsters in 1957. Then he was cast as the character who could build almost anything from bamboo and coconuts, but could never manage to fix a hole in a boat. Johnson was good-natured about the joke in later interviews. The logical inconsistency was built into the premise before he was ever cast, and he seemed to understand that some recurring questions belong more to the audience than to the actor. He answered them with patience rather than bitterness. His personal life held a quieter loss. His son David, a writer and AIDS activist in Los Angeles, died of AIDS-related complications in 1994. Johnson continued working, appeared in reunion productions, and wrote his memoir Here on Gilligan's Isle. Russell Johnson died on January 16, 2014, at 89 years old from kidney failure. He survived war, a crash landing, and 50 years of polite questions about boat repair. He answered all of them like a man who knew the difference between what mattered and what did not. If Johnson's story was defined by what audiences never knew about the man behind the character, the next castmate had built his entire public reputation on something the audience knew very well, just not from this show. By the time Gilligan's Island began, Jim Backus already had one of the most recognizable voices in American animation. Since 1949, he had been the voice of Mr. Magoo, the nearsighted, obliviously confident cartoon character who wandered through disaster with absolute certainty that everything was going his way. But the face behind that voice had done serious dramatic work. In 1955, Backus played the father in Rebel Without a Cause, not a caricature, but a specific failure of a man, someone whose son could see exactly what he was and could not forgive it. Thurston Howell let him use all of his gifts at once: comic timing, patrician certainty, and the precise playing of obliviousness without turning the character into pure contempt. His wife, Henny Backus, was a frequent presence in his professional life, and the two co-wrote humorous books together. Their marriage, which began in 1943, lasted until his death. In later years, Parkinson's disease affected his work, but he continued returning to Mr. Magoo and to the Gilligan's Island world as long as he could. Jim Backus died on July 3, 1989, at 76 years old from pneumonia. A man who made aristocratic obliviousness into an art form never seemed to miss much that actually mattered. The woman who played his wife on screen had already mastered her own form of strategic invisibility and had been practicing it for decades before the cameras found her. She agreed to film the pilot for a reason often repeated in later accounts. It was shooting in Hawaii, and she thought it would be a pleasant trip. She signed the contract, flew to the islands, filmed her scenes, and returned to Los Angeles expecting the show to disappear, as most pilots do. Then CBS picked it up. The age she was when that happened was 63, not 45, which was what the press had been told. Not 50, which would have been a generous estimate, 63. She had been born in November of 1900, had lived through Prohibition and 2 world wars, and had spent 40 years of film and stage work before she ever set foot on that soundstage in Burbank. She maintained the fiction of a much younger birth year with absolute discipline, never confirming, never correcting the record, declining quietly whenever the subject arose. She was independently wealthy through Beverly Hills real estate investments made long before the show made her recognizable. Her marriage to actor Louis Calhern, which had begun in 1934, ended in divorce in 1942. In the decades since, she had built her financial life entirely on her own terms. Natalie Schafer died on April 10, 1991, at 90 years old from liver cancer. She kept her real age hidden through a professional life in an industry obsessed with discovering exactly those kinds of secrets. The show lasted 3 seasons. The secret lasted for decades. She arrived at Gilligan's Island having already filmed God's Little Acre in 1958, a serious dramatic feature that won her a Golden Globe as a promising new star. She had Broadway credits. She had a substantial career in film and television behind her. The resume she carried onto that set suggested someone moving toward film and stage, not a lifetime of being remembered as 1/7 of a sitcom ensemble. The account she has given over the years is more specific than simple resentment. She expected Ginger to be closer to a Lucille Ball and Marilyn Monroe type, glamorous, funny, and playful. At one point, she felt the character was being pushed in a harsher, more sarcastic direction, and she objected after changes behind the camera. She later said the part worked better. But when the original series ended, Louise kept her distance. She did not appear in the 3 reunion television movies. Judith Baldwin replaced her as Ginger in the first 2, and Constance Forsland played the role in the 3rd. Louise built the rest of her life outside the show's orbit, acting, writing, raising her daughter Caprice, and speaking publicly about causes that mattered to her. In 2026, Tina Louise is 92 years old, the last surviving member of the main cast. They were 7 strangers on a 3-hour tour that lasted a lifetime. As the years pass, the laughter remains, but the reality of the cast of Gilligan's Island reminds us that the greatest storms aren't found at sea, but in the quiet moments after the cameras stop rolling.